Your manager has a tremendous influence on your work life, your day-to-day happiness, how much satisfaction you get out of your job, and your promotion prospects. In an ideal world, we'd get to pick our managers with full understanding of who they are, but that's not realistic. What we can do, however, is evaluate the manager that we have and decide whether we want to switch to a new job with a new manager, stick with this one, or maybe even follow this manager when it's time for them to leave. Hi, I'm John Miller, the Deliberate Engineer. I spent 30 years working as a software engineer and software engineering manager at a variety of big tech and other companies, including Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. I got to see these companies from the inside, and with the dozen or so managers I had myself, I've been exposed to a lot of different management styles and gotten to see the implications of those management styles. Likewise, I've managed people directly and managed managers, so I've gotten to see which strategies worked well, which ones didn't, and what sort of attributes made a manager successful and valued by their employees. In all of my time moving around, I've had a couple of really good managers, a couple of bad managers, and then a whole bunch of managers who fell somewhere in the middle with a combination of attributes. For the rest of this video, I'd like to take some time describing what I think are good manager attributes to look for, what are yellow flags or warning signs that aren't necessarily fatal, and a couple of red flags, which are things you have to be very careful working for a manager who displays them. Some of the rest of this video will assume that you're already familiar with what managers do in their day-to-day work. If you're not, you might want to see one of my other videos called, shockingly, What Managers Do. First, what makes a manager a good manager? Well, it's a big plus if they're organized, positive, compartmentalized, a cheerleader, engaged, and adaptive. Let me explain a little bit more about each of these attributes. First and foremost, a manager manages. They're responsible for setting up schedules, for deciding who does what, for monitoring the behavior of the team and relationships with other teams. They make agreements for what the team is going to produce and get agreements from other teams in what's going to be made to enable this team's work. In order to do all of this, a manager has to be extremely organized. They have to be good at working with a variety of different competing factors at a high level and deciding what order they can be done and prioritizing them. They're also responsible for keeping the team appropriately staffed. That means hiring, firing, and making sure that people get promoted on a reasonable schedule. Primary requirements for a manager to be good at this is first and foremost to have good organization skills and also to have good communication skills. They're working with people. They need to be able to communicate clearly and understand clearly what other people are communicating. You also want your manager to be somebody who prioritizes this organizational work and getting the right things done to keep the team running over their own enjoyment. For example, they should be managing, not spending all their time playing with the fun bits of the code. A manager needs to be positive. They need to keep a very positive focus to the team and exude confidence that whatever's being worked on is attainable and achievable. They need to be the people saying, hey, you know what? This can definitely get done. We just don't have to worry about it. If you have a manager who's negative, who always talks about how much trouble everything's in, at least to their team, then sooner or later the people on the team are going to start believing them and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What you want instead is a manager who emphasizes the positive and the progress. You want somebody who, if they see somebody who's doing a 80% crap job and a 20% okay job, will take a look and when they communicate to other people say, hey, look at this 20% this person's doing. Same thing for the type of work the team is doing. You need to stay positive to keep everybody motivated and help the team do its best possible work. So having a manager who takes a positive view on everything is absolutely something you want to look for. A manager should be good at compartmentalizing and multitasking. A manager has to deal with a variety of different things every day, and a lot of them are awful things. Projects not going well, people having personal problems, what have you. You don't want the manager's bad experiences in a day to become your bad day when they talk to you. So the manager needs to be able to only associate with a given meeting or given person the context that directly affects them, while not being influenced too much by the other things that have happened in their day. When I was a manager of managers, I actually was able to do this. My time was mostly divided up into 30-minute chunks and I was always going from one meeting to another. I could go from a meeting where I was practically yelling, arguing for things to happen and being pissed about something awful that wasn't getting done correctly, And then to another meeting that was a one-on-one with one of my reports who was having problems, that I had to be very sympathetic and understanding, and I didn't bring any of that baggage with me. It was a very useful skill, and if you can find a manager who can do this without being a sociopath, it's absolutely something to look for. You also want a manager who's a cheerleader. When I say cheerleader, I don't mean rah, 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 although we did talk about positivity. What I mean is somebody who will be a good conduit for the good things happening in the team. Whenever a report does something great, the manager trumpets that up to their manager and whoever else can make decisions about rewarding the team or rewarding that person. Say, what a great job this person did. When there's a problem, they don't point out who the problem was with unless it's absolutely required. Instead, what they say is, well, yeah, the team kind of fumbled this one, and we'll see if we can't do a better job moving forward. So they emphasize the positives and give credit where credit's due for the good things, and for the bad things, they still work with the person who's having the problem and solve the problem, but they don't spread it around and get that person punished and thought of poorly by the people outside of the team. This is critical for being able to be promoted in a timely fashion. A manager who's a good cheerleader will have already laid the groundwork for the next promotion or the next positive review and outstanding rewards for a good performer, because everybody already knows the great things that that person is doing, which is one of the hurdles you often have to overcome when you're reviewing somebody and pushing for exceptional rewards. A good manager is engaged in their reports' careers. They know what's needed for that person to make it to the next level. They're constantly working to find appropriate work items for the employee to demonstrate their ability to perform at the next level and get that promotion. They are laying the groundwork, as I said earlier, with the other teams, with the people who have to approve the promotion. The manager also makes sure that the employee has enough time to demonstrate the things they need to go to the next level. If they have some work that they've been owning for a while but isn't really appropriate for their level, they look at handing that off to other employees who will benefit from it to free up the time for that employee to be more successful. Finally, a good manager is adaptive. They don't treat everybody equally. This is something that I was surprised by the first time that I learned this lesson, which was several years into my management career. I used to think it was critical to treat everybody absolutely equally. Everybody got the same amount of my time, everybody got the same opportunities, and that was fair. This winds up not being the case. In fact, you do want to be fair to your employees, but that means, by definition, you have to treat them unequally. Some people will benefit from getting inch stones rather than milestones and having regular check-ins with their manager a couple times a week, getting support, having things reviewed, and the rest of it. Other people will not be able to thrive under those circumstances. They'll want to have a sync up at the beginning of a large chunk of work and then be left alone to their devices to work on that thing, to deliver it, and only come back and see the manager when they think they have something completed. The manager needs to be flexible, adaptive, to make sure that they can handle this spectrum of needs of their reports. So much for the list of positive attributes. What about the things that are yellow flags, warnings that maybe this isn't the ideal manager, but things that aren't on their own enough to keep them from being a good person to work for? The three attributes I put in this bucket are managers who are self-involved, managers who are unresponsive, and managers who are indecisive, who can't make a decision on things that need quick decisions. A self-involved manager cares more about themselves and their career than they do the teams that they represent. So whenever something good happens in their team, they don't represent up, oh, look at the great work Bob did. Instead, they'll say something like, look at the great work that I made happen in my team. I could have made it happen with any team, but I got it with this team, and it's all because of me. They're interested in how they're perceived, they want to have the best chances of being promoted, and they want to be able to advance quickly. The same sort of manager, when something bad happens, they're very quick to point a finger and cast blame. So instead of saying, oh, the team failed to do this thing, they'll say, Bob did it. I told him not to do it this way. I was on him the whole way, but he still chose to do it incorrectly. Don't worry, I'll punish Bob and take care of this. These two attributes of a manager, this behavior where they are casting blame and taking credit for things that are really team things, you just don't want them to do that. Another yellow flag is an unresponsive manager. These managers are like a black hole when it comes to phone calls and emails and attempts to reach them. You reach out, they never get back to you. And it seems like they're always impossible to find. Or if you do find them, they're busy and you can't reach them. A manager who is unresponsive, who doesn't make sure that the right things are enabled, can be a real roadblock for a team. The third yellow flag is a manager who's indecisive. You might be able to talk to them, but when you talk to them and ask their opinion on something or try and get their approval for something, they're like, well, let me think about this for a while. And they just can't make a decision. In fact, the time for a good, timely decision to be made comes and goes, and they're sort of hemming and hawing. Even worse is when this indecisiveness is combined with somebody who they're not willing to delegate. Then you wind up with a team that's producing far less than it should and is paralyzed by their manager's indecisiveness. There's different degrees of this, which is why it's more of a yellow flag than a red flag, but it can still be big trouble to work on a team where you can't get the manager to enable you to do your best work. And finally, there are red flags, which is inconsistent communication and blame shifting. The yellow flags you can live with, but if you have a manager that has either of these red flags, you need to be very careful working with them and ideally move out from under them as quickly as you can. When I say inconsistent communications, I don't mean a manager who is giving different messages to different people. What I mean is a manager who will say 3 different things the same way and have 3 different expectations of how those things will be done and what they expect to happen. For example, those 3 things, one of them might be an observation that they expect you to look at it and think about it and nothing more. One of them might be a suggestion where you have to have a good justification why you didn't take that suggestion. And one of them might be a direct order where if you don't do it, you're going to be in trouble. Whenever something goes wrong with one of these things, some work doesn't get done or some work gets done but not in the right way, then the manager will inevitably come back and say, why didn't you do what I told you? Or why did you do this strange thing? I just gave you a suggestion to think about. So this sort of inconsistent communication can be a real problem for understanding what your manager wants. I actually bumped into this one of the times that I was a manager. I had a manager who had this inconsistent communication style. It got so bad that I got into the habit of every time I talked to this manager, I would at the end of the conversation say, here's what I heard you say. You want me to do this, you want me to think about this, and you want me to investigate this thing and get back to you. This was frustrating for both myself and that manager, but it was absolutely necessary. And it did take care of the problems that I was having with that manager up to that point. So you absolutely don't want to have to exist with a manager who has this inconsistent communication style. Finally, you don't want a manager who shifts blame. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about managers who take credit for things themselves and cast blame on the person who actually did the thing. This is one step further than that. It's a manager who, for whatever reason, decides to actually lie about who or what is responsible for something. They take credit for things they didn't do. And whenever there's a problem, they figure out who they can successfully cast blame on, who they also don't like, and pass it that way. They're especially likely to do this for themselves and for the people they consider their most useful allies. This is awful because it can be very hard to countermand the impression that one of these managers gives. On the bright side, people usually catch on, but it can take a few years. So it's a situation you just don't want to be in. Don't work for a manager who always has a story about how somebody else broke things and then you find out it's not true. Summing things up, your manager has a lot to do with how pleasant your work life is and how likely you are to get promoted. You want a manager to have several different attributes. You want them to be somebody who's responsive, who's positive, who is communicative, who's good at being a cheerleader and passing up encouraging things about you to lay the groundwork for your career. And you want them to be interested in your career and kind of pushing things forward. You can live with a manager who has some negative traits, what I was calling yellow flags. But you need to stay away from the managers who have those red flags, who have inconsistent communications, or who do blame shifting and finger pointing at people who aren't even responsible for things. A manager controls your career. In a perfect world, everybody would be able to see the work you're doing, but in the corporate world, that's just not the case. A lot of it relies on your manager for how you're rewarded, how you're perceived, and how you get promoted in that company. Take the time to find a manager, pay attention to what your manager does and how they're perceived, and figure out if this is somebody you want to keep working for. So what do you think of these different attributes that I mentioned for managers? Do they make sense? Did I miss anything? Is there anything you don't agree with? Go ahead and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you think and what your experiences are. Thank you for watching the video, and keep on pushing forward. Hi, this is John. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please think about subscribing so you get notified of my future videos. Also, if you are interested, you might want to check out the video I have linked here. Thanks, and keep on pushing forward.